Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We are doing power rankings for SEC football teams heading into week 7. We always start at the bottom, and we start today with Vanderbilt, which has been at the bottom of our power rankings most of the year. It is not unanimous this week. The Commodores had a lead on Ole Miss, and the defense basically didn't show up in the second half. But here's some things on Vandy. Offense is very much improved. Special teams very much improved. The defense is just giving most of that back. But the Commodores have won 3 games, so they're already over the Vegas predicted win total of 2.5, and frankly, have got a shot to make some things interesting and maybe sneak an SEC win at some point this season.
Yep. As we said, the measure of success, I think, is just them getting better. And I think they've shown that, for the most part. I think it's just getting better, win the games you're supposed to win. They've done all that to this point. So unfortunately, like we said, it's hard once you get to that bottom spot in the SEC. It's hard to climb very far unless you're making just drastic improvement. Although I don't think that was the expectation this season under Clark Lee. So yeah, they may be here, but Chris, it's almost like they feel like they're in a better spot at 14 this week than they were, previous weeks. And I think that's pretty much all you can ask for in terms of just making that improvement. So,
well, when Derek Mason handed over the program to Clark Lee, it was awful on offense, awful on defense, awful on special teams. Now it's really only awful in one phase, but that phase is so bad that they are still last in our power rankings. Okay. Number 13, the Auburn Tigers. Auburn actually with a worse scoring differential than Vandy. Vandy minus 3.7 a game. Auburn minus 4.7. Auburn minus 9 in turnovers. That's the worst in the league, hands down. We're just waiting on when's the axe going to fall on Brian Harsin at this point. That's really all that's left.
By the way, my reaction is because some weeks I see what our composite staff rankings are ahead of time. This week I have not. And so I can't say I'm shocked at the fact that Auburn dropped here because I thought about it. But I did wind up keeping them up one more spot in mind. But yeah, the numbers are what they are, right? Like it speaks for itself. We've said, just kind of looking at some of these games, they just get blown out at Georgia, the Penn State game, the disappointment even in the win against Missouri. The LSU game, you feel like maybe you got a chance to turn a corner, find a way to lose that one. There's no positive momentum right now for this team. And as we said, Chris, I think now the fascinating part becomes this week against Ole Miss. If we assume the outcome that most are expecting in that game, bye week comes after that. Are there any decisions that are made after that Ole Miss game, and where do things go from there for Auburn?
Well, I have a confession here. You have a right to be surprised over Auburn at 13 because that was my ballot. I was not looking at the composite. Auburn actually is 12 and higher.
There you go. So
I had Missouri ahead of Auburn. I know.
Oh.
It's a conspiracy against the
Look,
Tigers.
I'm not.
But which Tigers?
Listen, I'm gonna say right now, like I thought about it, like because again, this is where, and we've said this week after week, the problem becomes now when you have these dilemmas, right? If I'm deciding between Auburn or Missouri at 12 and 13, my mind is thinking, you know what? Missouri's looked pretty good the past couple weeks, right? They haven't looked bad. But then I'm like, but there's always that right there on the other shoulder, Chris. It's like, well, Auburn did beat Missouri, and it's just
Missouri beat Missouri.
Well, okay, that's true.
But yes, but
that's what we talk about, right? Like we talk about the head-to-heads at this point. Like I know a lot of people continue to bring that up when you talk about power rankings. It's just it's so hard to use as a kind of separator. But I'll be honest with you, I was very close to putting Missouri ahead of Auburn, and I probably, now that I think about it, I probably feel like I should have put Missouri ahead of Auburn.
But, well, here's the case. Missouri has actually given up exactly as many points as it scored. And again, Auburn did win that game in overtime, but it was in Auburn, and we've been over that one. I'm looking at the other metrics. Missouri -2 in turnovers. The computers are going to have these teams in about the same place. So judgment call The panel went Auburn 12, Missouri 13. I had it reversed. 11 was pretty unanimous. South Carolina at 11. And you could argue Carolina deserves to go higher. I don't. Man, I watched this team. It is -6 in turnovers. It is almost +9 in scoring per game. Offensively, it's fairly pedestrian, 389 yards a game. Don't really trust Spencer Rattler, but he did win them a game in Lexington. Defensively, they've been kind of sneaky good. They're giving up 5.3 yards a play. You could argue, if you want to get head-to-head, that's where it gets complicated with the next team.
Yes.
But we've got South Carolina pretty decisively at 11. I don't think it's a super talented team, but this again is Shane Beamer getting just about everything out of what he's got. And yes, you can say Kentucky didn't have Will Levis. Carolina still went to Lexington and beat a pretty decent team even without Levis. You got to give these guys credit. They've taken a couple of beatdowns early, absorbed it, and they're doing what they did last year, which is just continuing to play good ball and beat the teams they should beat.
And herein lies the other problem now with our power rankings is what is the value of the win against Kentucky without Levis? And I'm not saying it's nothing,
Yeah.
but it's like for me when I'm trying to go through mine, and again, our staff, I'm sure they had the same issue with the other guys that we have that are helping us do this. It's like where do you place them? Like how much value do you give that win? And I think it's so hard to kind of put comparing them to the teams that we're about to have ahead of them. It's just like I don't know what you do with them. And um so we'll see, right? Because now it's really the last, I mean, look, they get that win. The couple weeks before they played, who was it? South Carolina State, Charlotte. So it's like it's hard to kind of put that number on that. And now we kind of look ahead, and it's just it's hard to know, right? Because you still don't feel like you have a great grasp, but you saw a lot out of that Kentucky win. It's just the value of it compared to the other teams you're going to have in front of them. That's the hard thing I think with South Carolina this week is like you said, in a certain sense, you could certainly make the case that they should be higher than a couple of these other teams just coming off that win. But the value of it without Will Levis, it's hard to figure out. So,
Okay, at number 10, Arkansas. Razorbacks are one of 3 teams in the league that have given up more points than they have scored. On the other hand, Arkansas has probably played the toughest schedule in the country to date. It doesn't really get – it gets easier actually from here, but it's not an easy schedule even on the whole. Of course, Arkansas lost to Texas A&M. Arkansas did beat South Carolina. That's probably a reason. The Razorbacks are ahead of South Carolina, even though Carolina outscoring teams almost 9 points a game. Arkansas getting beat almost a field goal a game. But I think when both teams are at full strength, and see, that's another thing. Like, how do you evaluate teams? Like, when we get to Kentucky, do you evaluate Kentucky as having Will Levis?
Yep.
Even if it doesn't? I mean, this is where it gets tricky. But we went Arkansas 10, South Carolina 11 as a staff this week.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see Arkansas dropped at this point. Like we said, the defense is what it is. And you brought up the other point. Like these power rankings getting harder and harder now for a lot of these different variables. And it's like, where do you put the teams that are losing games without their starting quarterback? And it's like we'll talk about Kentucky in a minute now with Arkansas, but I think with Arkansas, you've got a little bit better of a understanding of where they stand, just because of the defensive side of it. And I think I had him at 10 in my personal one. I'm going to pull it up here in a second, but I just don't know where else you would put them because I
You
think some
did
of these
have
other teams.
Arkansas at 10.
Yeah, I was going to say, so like it just became a point where you look at the teams ahead of them and you just feel like that they are in a better spot right now. But, you know, is that with or without KJ Jefferson? It's hard to kind of also evaluate that and comparing them to these teams that will be ahead of them in this week's rankings.
Okay, Blake, 2 teams in this league have given up more yards than they've allowed. And then they've gotten, excuse me. You can guess one pretty easily. That's Vanderbilt. Who's the second?
Two teams that have the team
Given
that's
up
given
more
up
yards than they have gained.
more yards than they've gained. LSU, A&M.
A&M. The
A&M. I
Aggies
don't know
are
why. Yeah,
minus 32 a game. They've actually outscored opponents 21.5 to 18.3. Boy, take the under when the
oh yeah,
Aggies play.
oh yeah.
Now, on the other hand, A&M is only allowing 5.2 yards a snap defensively, actually 5.1. It's +1 in turnovers. The Aggies check in as our number 9 team this week.
Really, they are at 9th.
They were at
Oh
9.
man, I thought they would have moved to. Listen. I'd have them much higher, but I had them higher than 9th. So- but you know what? There's another. Let's talk about this too. Like
Actually, you know what? You're right. That's my ballot again. I've got to keep looking at
Oh
I keep
my
looking at the wrong
gosh!
sheet. All
All
right,
right.
I'll give it away now. Florida 9, LSU 8, A&M 7.
There we go. I like that a lot better.
I just don't think A&M. I would not put A&M in front of the teams in front of it.
But still, like, right there's another discussion we can go into. What's the value of a close loss? Like, like we can
Yeah.
start having those discussions. I get it.
But
I
but
thought,
on the other hand, I should A&M have beaten Arkansas. Ball hits the tip of a field goal. I just
well, here's my thing is like LSU. What do you do with LSU? Because remember that discussion we had last week about Phil Steele having LSU at 61 or whatever it was, something like that, and
yeah,
we're like, that's got to be a misprint. Well, Tennessee comes out and just drubs them. But
didn't
you know
make it
what?
look like a misprint. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so that was my thing too. Is like, do I think it's just Tennessee being that good? Which, if you've watched and kind of heard me all season, I do think they're that good. But I wasn't expecting that. I thought they'd win, but I wasn't expecting that. And so I don't know how much you put on LSU for that. Um, Man, it's these teams in this range, which I assume now we know who number 6 is going to be, because we haven't set them yet. And again, I know there's probably some people going to say, how can you put them at number 6 when they just lost to South Carolina? It's got to be Kentucky, right?
It is.
Kentucky's gonna be number
Yeah,
6, but like,
so
what do you do? Like, I don't know how you separate these teams. But listen, Florida and LSU, Chris, there will be some separation in our power rankings next week because, oh, by the way, they play each other this week.
so again, we go Florida 9, LSU 8, A&M 7, Kentucky 6. Personally, I would have gone LSU 6, Kentucky 7, Florida 8, A&M 9.
Ooh, see,
And I
but
probably
again,
need to hide my sheet since I keep reading off
yeah,
mine. But anyway,
I can't argue with it because again, I don't know what you like. We said there's so many things now when you look at this. I think A&M. I don't know. Like, I would even
you
question
have
if
to
I.
score points, man. You have to
I
score
know.
points,
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
and they don't.
Florida against Missouri, like what was the standout there? Like, was there anything that kind of warranted a Florida jump? I don't think so. Like we said, LSU, what's the takeaway from just getting blown out against Tennessee? Is it Tennessee? Is it just the Tennessee effect right now with how they've been playing? And the Kentucky thing, like Kentucky was the hardest team for me to place. Like, what do I do? Like, do I just completely put them behind all these teams? Knowing that they didn't have their potential first round quarterback playing. And I know they lost by double digits, but it was like the thing we just talked about with South Carolina. It's like, where do I put South Carolina? This was the biggest mess of power rankings all season long, just because of all the variables I think that were in play this week. But I'll tell you what's undeniable, Chris, and I know we're gonna have a little ad read here before we get to it, but our top 5 undeniable this week,
Our
without
top
question.
5 was pretty unanimous. But
Yeah,
here's a weird thing on Florida. Florida's averaging almost 7.3 yards a play. That's second in the league. I mean, we think of Florida
they
and we
got the
think
big, yeah.
of not having a quarterback and offensive issues. We also think of Florida traditionally as a team that's got a pretty stout defense, and we talked about the pass rush. Florida giving up 6.5 yards a snap. This is a strange team because you watch them and you don't think the offense has been that good, but they're like a sneaky good running team. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and it feels like I don't know, like I think it's the inconsistency overall of the offense. I feel like that's what you and turnovers too, right? Because what they have, how many turnovers they have against? Um, I can't remember. I know they had the fumble, but I think that's something too that we kind of looked at, right? Um,
But they're +2 on the year in turnovers.
well, I
I mean,
still
I'm looking this up to make sure that I didn't put the stuff down wrong. Florida is legitimately averaging 7.3 yards a snap.
I mean, look, I mean, Anthony Richardson threw for what against
On
Missouri?
pass.
60 something yards. And yet,
That's
you know,
on, yeah, on throws. Yeah.
yeah, but again, it's you know he's got a really good chance to go over 100 yards because he's going to be able to run for 40 something. I think it's what he did against Missouri too, 45 yards on the ground. Um, so those kind of Florida's another one of those teams that like if you look at their what is it? They beat Eastern Washington. We talked about how they looked better against Tennessee. Thought they played pretty well for the most part against Tennessee. Beat Eastern Washington. Now they beat Missouri. Like it's just kind of that you feel like they're quietly getting back on track, right?
Darn near beat Tennessee and Knoxville.
Yeah.
But the week before almost lost to a terrible South Florida team. I
Right.
mean, because South Florida couldn't execute special teams plays. I mean, they've just been all over the map.
This is a great again, if we're talking about we don't know where Florida and LSU are at, right?
Yeah.
That's why I love the way the schedule sets up because this week, like, it's just a great opportunity to really see where these two teams are at. Although I do think, like I said, Florida may be a little under the radar in terms of their improvement over the past 3 weeks or so.
Yeah, I think Florida and LSU to me are the hardest two teams to form opinions on.
Yeah.
I just because I look at them and week to week, it just seems to change.
Good thing they're playing. Yes.
Which is why you sort of have to go with the whole. But anyway, all right. Before we get to the top 5 of our league, which were not hard to pick, thank you to our sponsor, Stakes. Every week we make some picks in the Stakes app. That is STAKES. We do those on individual games. We want to hear from you guys if you agree or disagree with our picks. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Sign up for Stakes. Get your predictions in. Let us know if you agree with our picks or against them. If you use the invite code Southeastern14 when you sign up, you'll get a double welcome bonus. It is free to play, free to join, free to place your predictions. It is not a betting app. It's just for fun. You can even win stuff. What's not to like? Join Stakes today. Use that promo code Southeastern14 and join us in the fun. Okay, number 5, the team that I had been high on all year, and I do think that LSU game now was an aberration. The Mississippi State Bulldogs, Blake. Just this is I don't know if you say it's a team with no weakness, but there's nothing on paper that just sticks out to you and says, yeah, this is where Mississippi State is vulnerable. It has a running game for a change. We've talked about how underrated the defense is. It is +2 in turnover margin. It is good on special teams. It is a veteran team. There's a whole lot to like about Mississippi State.
Yep, there is for sure. And like you said, it doesn't feel like there's just one of those just truly standout areas where you're just like, man, they're bad there, right? Like it's just they feel pretty solid or better across the board. And like you said, yeah, they're developing a 100-yard rusher now. Like they're even adding that to the mix. But we know just it's so hard to prepare for them offensively. Their defense with the experience and just the talent on that side of the ball, they've been good. Yeah, I mean they're in a good spot, and of course that makes it even more interesting the fact that they head to Lexington this weekend to play a Kentucky team with the unknowns of whether Will Levis plays, whether he doesn't. But yeah, I really like this Mississippi State team. Really like their offense, but their ability to force turnovers too defensively. I love that, and yeah, I just think that this is a very warranted spot here for Mississippi State, and I don't think there was any doubt they were going to be in the top 5.
Yeah, I think even with Will Levis, State's a better team. Staying in the state of Mississippi, a team I had a chance to see, the Ole Miss Rebels, who are 4th in our rankings. They're also 4th in point differential, +25.2. Here's a fact about Ole Miss. Defense giving up 4.56 yards a snap. That's second in the league behind Alabama. Now, Ole Miss's schedule has probably been the easiest in the league, but Ole Miss can throw the ball. Ole Miss can run the ball. This is a really, really, like State, just it's hard to poke a big hole in this team anywhere.
Yep. Like you said, all you can do is play the games that are on your schedule. And I'll admit, I was one of the ones initially who was like, man, I just don't know what to make of this team, because of the schedule. But at some point, you win the games you're supposed to win. And they've done that in every scenario, right? Like they've beaten everybody in front of them. And that's all you can ask for. And so, yeah, I mean, we talked about just the trajectory of the defense. That was a question coming into the season. Not that we thought that they were going to be bad. It was just how big of that jump continue to be defensively. And we've seen it to this point. And yes, it's been very fun to watch. Obviously, the rushing attack we've talked about many times now. Just that's also just very entertaining to watch them just run the ball against teams. And yeah, so Ole Miss in a really good spot here. And oh, what do you know, Chris? Another very favorable matchup this week against Auburn.
Yeah, Ole Miss could sneak into the college football playoff. I think State is going to have a hard time. You'd love to have that LSU game back if you're State, but you can't. Anyway, number 3 in our rankings, and Tennessee's been here a while. The Vols, who are number 2 in the league in scoring margin, plus 29 a game, averaging just a hair over 2.2 yards a play. What am I trying to say? Tennessee gains 7.2 yards a play, gives up 5.2. So that's a 2-yard margin per snap. That's really excellent. Plus 5 in turnovers. We talked about Hendon Hooker has not had an interception all year. I think only had 3 last year. Tennessee's defense has kind of been sneaky good. Now, some of that may be the slate of offensive teams it's played. But anyway, you can only do what's in front of you. I think the Vols, a very solid number 3. And frankly, I think one thing we didn't expect is that line is sort of blurred between the Vols and the top 2 teams in front of it. And we'll find out a lot more about that this week.
Yep, that's what I was going to say. It almost felt like the most of the season we've been saying Alabama and Georgia, 1A, 1B, swap them around each and every week, depending on what you see from those teams. But you almost feel like Tennessee's entered that category now. And now we set up for the biggest game of the year to this point. I don't think there's any question about that with Tennessee hosting Alabama. Now, obviously, Chris, we will add this into the mix, and we will certainly talk more about this on Wednesday night. But we did our prediction video on Sunday nights as we usually do. And, I told you I was like, I'm picking Tennessee to win this game. Now, Jalen McCullough, the arrest there, what kind of impact does that have? You're talking about a starting safety. I think he's top 5 on the team in tackles, somewhere in there. So what does that, against an Alabama team that if they do get Bryce Young back, we know what they're capable of offensively. So that obviously throws a bit of an interesting wrinkle into that matchup. But again, we'll talk more about that on Wednesday night. But yeah, I mean, I think right now, it was so impressive to see what Tennessee did at LSU because you and I talked about that game so much. And the fact that they went down there and did that, the way they did it without Cedric Tillman, I mean, it's as impressive as it gets. And Tennessee now, number 6 team in the country, and certainly deserving of this spot here at number 3, I think. And I wouldn't be surprised if some people could even argue, you know what, move them up a spot ahead of somebody else. And guess what, Chris, if they win this week, I think they'll be moving up a spot or 2, perhaps. So,
well, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I mean, if Tennessee beats Alabama, Tennessee could be the number 1 team in our rankings next week.
Absolutely.
So we'll see how well that one ages. But
so you got listen.
Okay,
you got a lot of work to do to get that spot. It's not going to come easy. So
yeah, you have to work to get it. Okay, we had a split decision on our top 2. We ended up going as a group with Alabama at 1, which I think is the right call. Georgia at 2. Alabama number 1 in the league in scoring margin, plus 31.8. Georgia 28.8, which was just behind Tennessee. Yardage margin is a wash. Alabama averaging 3.7 yards a snap more than opponents. Georgia 2.6 more. That was kind of the separator. Now, the problem is turnovers. Georgia +2, Alabama, I think -5. Bama's been a little better on special teams. That turnover, I don't know if that's just a one-off thing against LSU. Alabama's also gathered a lot of penalties this year, but I think Alabama at 1 is the right call. But again, we will start to get more clarity on this really quickly.
Yeah, again, it's like, what do you do with Alabama based on that Texas A&M game, right? And I think that was probably the question for me, is where was everyone going to put them? Were they going to put them in that one spot, number 2 spot? How much is the value of that without Bryce Young? But they still find a way to win the game. And I think, again, I think we've said, like, A&M defensively, we know what they're capable of, and so maybe not as surprising, and that's why they moved up a bit in our rankings. But yeah, I mean, I think it's we've swapped these two. I feel like a lot of
All
weeks
year.
this season. Yeah, and so put them where you want them right now. But clearly, I think the biggest separator comes this weekend, right? Because I think if Alabama goes in, beats Tennessee, they're clearly going to be the number 1 spot. Doesn't matter what Georgia does against Vanderbilt, But if Tennessee beats Alabama, then you're talking about the discussion then flips to Tennessee, Georgia, and so it's this is the biggest separator we've had at this point, I think, with Alabama and Georgia, perhaps, to see kind of where they are come next week's rankings.
Yeah, I mean, 3.8 yards a play given up on defense. I think that is getting overlooked. That's ridiculous. Now, look, offense.
Yeah.
Here's what Alabama's played: Utah State, which is bad; Texas, which is pretty good; Louisiana Monroe, which is bad; Vandy, which actually has a pretty good offense. Alabama just completely
But
shut
didn't,
it down.
yeah.
The Vanderbilt was almost a 0 offensively in that game. Arkansas, good offensive team. A&M, bad offensive team, but for whatever reason, the Aggies just bring it against Alabama every time. And again, turnovers had a lot to do with that. But
That was
it is what
kind
it
of my
is.
point. Yeah, it was, and that's why I think the Tennessee Alabama game, it's just because, Alabama hasn't seen an offense anywhere close to that in terms of the offensive teams they play. Because even in the Texas game, right, the backup quarterback in, and that's not an excuse that Alabama still won the game, but like that's what I mean. Like that's why the dynamic of this is so interesting heading into this one, because the defense has been so good. Like they've just been dominant. And now you play an offense that's been so dominant. Oh, it's just, it's what you love if you enjoy college football. So,
All right. Well, if you enjoy college football and the SEC, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We do live shows every Wednesday night. That way you get the reminder that we're coming on. We pick all the games every week. We do power rankings. And by the way, basketball around the corner. We'll do a ton of basketball stuff and then baseball after that. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thanks to Steaks for sponsoring our channel, and we'll see you again soon.